have a conservative regime for a lot longer than Mr. Trump is in office. So with all those happy notes, I'm glad to take your questions or, as I say, hear your comments or suggestions. Yes?
Can you comment on the proportion that was spent by Trump and Clinton? He's expressed the whole number.
Yeah, I don't have the exact number, but Clinton outspent Trump by quite a bit. There was a lot of PAC money, but a lot of the PAC money was going to the Senate races and the House races and down the ballot. One thing is we often talk about the vaunted ground game that Obama had, and Clinton had a significant ground game, but in truth, the Republicans did much better this time. I'll give you one example. The Republicans in the previous presidential election in 2012 had 800 staff members working the entire country that they were paying for. This time they had 6,000. So while they didn't have a complete ground game, it was really being overwhelmed by the populace rising up with this anger, as I was suggesting. They were much more competent than they had been even 4 years ago. And we have this war going on. In my book, what we go into the details about how voter analytics are used, how social media is used, how all the new techniques are used in the election process. But Clinton did not lose because she was vastly outspent. It was the other way around.
Yeah, could you comment on the party shift in the Rust Belt states, specifically Michigan and Pennsylvania? And
right, and Wisconsin and so on. So if you look at the map, you'll see Clinton won the East, won the West, California and the states north of California, won Illinois, and then everything else is basically red. That's a little oversimplified, and the South obviously is red. So the Midwest is a major battle, and who in the Midwest voted against Clinton is, as far as we can tell, it is the working class and the people that I just listed who've borne the brunt of the recession and have not gotten enough relief in the process as we recover from the recession. So for the Democrats, there's no real reason they should be losing the working class, except they haven't convinced them that they are the fighters for the working class anymore. So they have to shift that by 2018 and 2020. In addition, in truth, Clinton was a poor candidate. She didn't have charisma. She didn't. Let me just give you an example on message. So what's Trump's message? Right? I think you know what Hillary's message is, but it's Hillary for America. What's that? What does that mean for you? I mean, it might mean something for Hillary to be president, but what does it mean for you? Hillary's for America. Well, that's as opposed to Obama's hope and change, which really meant that we could all be part of it, that minorities were part of it, that youth were part of it, and as a movement we could change the direction of the country in a positive way. I mean, the wording may not be perfect, it was short, but the message of Obama was a much stronger, more positive message. I'm just doing just the message. In addition, as you know, Obama, for instance, is more charismatic than Clinton, and she said in the debate when they had their debate in the presidential election. Trump, whether you like him or not, is charismatic and is able to convince people that he speaks for them. And so to the extent that we have different candidates, maybe you would have a different result. Some of the states in the Midwest were relatively close. It wouldn't take, and it could be determined by turnout. That is, the people who probably are Democrats, if they were fired up and enthusiastic about the candidate, would be enough to overcome Trump in future elections. At least that's the hope of the Democrats. The Democrats have to win back the Midwest. They can't, govern the country if they can't get the Midwest, because they're not going to completely regain the South and so forth. So they don't have to win all the Midwest, but they can't be in Pennsylvania as well. They have to win some of those working areas which is heavily working class. They lost the white vote, but Hillary didn't even win the women's vote except by 51%. So it wasn't like there was I mean, many women were very, motivated by Hillary. I've got 2 granddaughters who really wanted, of course they were 14 and 12, so they didn't count this election, but they really wanted her to win. But that was not translating to everybody.
I'd like to ask your perspective on a recent initiative that the president of the University of Illinois announced. You mentioned it's difficult to retain faculty, difficult to recruit faculty. The biggest problem he shared with us was the uncertainty of the budget. And so he's worked and developed a program called Investment, Performance, and Accountability Commitment. He's asking the legislature to provide really stable funding for the universities, for all the universities, over the next 5 years. And in return, promising to the state legislature that we will produce the kind of educated populace that will help bring Illinois out of its economic doldrums. There was an announcement that was made of this to the faculty, staff, and students. There also was some announcement out to the alumni. My question to you is, A, can our voices impact the legislators in regard to advancing this issue? And B, would that bring a positive result? Or is the legislature so tied up in itself that they're not even going to consider what might look like a win-win for each party?
Well, so there are a couple of parts of that. First of all, I'm not sure the legislature will, in fact, or anybody will give a multi-year approval ahead of time for funding. But the framing of the issue as we will deliver to you an educated populace which will make Illinois a leader in the nation and build the economy in this 21st century with bright people who have the right skills and who can do the work. And we'll guarantee that, and we'll give you reports that show we're actually doing it. I think that's a fine way to frame it. It gives an excuse for those handful of Republicans that need to cross the aisle to do so. Why the ones who, we don't have any Republicans representing directly the University of Illinois at Chicago, but there are in other parts of the state. And why the Republican representatives from the eastern and western areas that might completely collapse, or even the Bloomington area and some of the other public university centers in the state, don't break and support this, I don't know. So I see it as we have a good excuse. The president has framed it as a good initiative. It's a nice way to talk to the legislators about it. It's a nice way to talk to the governor. I'm just not sure he's listening. But we really need to pressure the legislature, and we need to do it sooner than later. I don't know that there will be a lot sooner than the new legislative session, but it would be ideal to try and at least get some full year budget, at least for universities, in the January lame duck session. And we must do the same thing in the regular legislative session for the real budget that will be coming out, that always in the past has come out in the end of June. So it is about changing a few legislators. I think it's an easy sell to most of the Democratic legislators. I think if you ask Republican legislators privately, they will say, yes, we can't afford to have disaster, universities collapsing, students not going to school, and so forth. So I think we have a good rhetorical argument. What I learned in the city council, though, is when I made brilliant, I thought, speeches and produced facts and great arguments, Plato and Socrates and all the others would have been very proud, Demosthenes would have been very proud of me. Somehow it didn't sway the votes of my colleagues. So I sort of think a lot of pressure, we have the right rhetorical vehicle and it's new, and we should push it and support the president's initiative. but it's still a matter of pressuring the legislators.
Just as a follow-up, are there individual Republican legislators you feel that we need to pressure more than others? Are there names you can name?
You can get the names. Essentially, they're the ones who come and represent the immediate communities of the other public universities in the state. So all you have to do is draw a circle around Urbana, Eastern, Western, Bloomington, where we have several, and so forth. Take all the public universities in the state. Don't worry about the legislators who represent Chicago State University or UIC or Northeastern. They will all vote for us in a heartbeat. The problem is getting it with some Republicans who would be willing to either make a total budget deal or would at least make a deal on the universities from your perspective.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, I was thinking about as I was thinking about the Democrats, I think we really need a real grassroots movement. I'm not sure how that would take place, and you know, other than to really pressure our legislators, let them know what we expect, what we want. But I mean, it seems like we've just sort of gone to sleep on democracy. And since the Democrats are not in power, what can the organization really do to rebuild itself and to recapture those lost voters?
So, in a way, that's what my book, Winning Elections in the 21st Century, is about. And so, but in this specific kind of way, I'll go back a little. I was state campaign manager for Eugene McCarthy for president in 1968. And a number of our McCarthy supporters made a mistake, like some of the Sanders supporters did this time, and we didn't vote for Hubert Humphrey because we were mad about the '68 convention and so on. In only 2 places that I could know of did we do something more than, you know, produce a bad election result. That you can blame LBJ and the Democratic Party as well. But in any case, in Chicago, we invented a new thing called the Independent Precinct Organization and changed the future of politics in Chicago by electing, for the first time, independents on the north side of Chicago. And our techniques were copied on the west side and copied in the Latino community. And we began to change the direction of Chicago politics by organizing locally, not by, I mean, we had the idea, you might have had this in your mind, we'll elect a president and work our way down. As you suggest, it goes the other way. If we have a grassroots movement that's strong enough, we can work our way up and change things along the way. So I'm a firm believer in organizing in the local congressional districts and doing it in much the way we did, and I'm in a firm belief that you affect politicians most by being able to affect elections. Even if you don't, you know, defeat them, if you defeat some, they begin to pay serious attention to your issues, and they start doing better candidates. We used to have terrible cigar-smoking old guys running the north side of Chicago, and then we suddenly got new computer programmers and other candidates by the machine on the north side, and they got to be more liberal and be better, and so on and so forth. After Howard Dean's lost election, he created DFA, Democrats for America. It worked pretty well, and it was grassroots around the country. What Bernie Sanders is trying to do is create our revolution. So far with our revolution, however, they're not putting in place the kind of organization that either we did after the McCarthy defeat or Dean did after his defeat. So I'm looking for groups that are going to organize locally and build an election apparatus that can defeat either Republican or Democratic machines or big money or whoever's on the other side. In terms of the short term, I do think organizing for specific issues like funding for the homeless, like funding for the universities, is a meaningful thing to do, and it is doable. We have the structure to do that, particularly between Illinois Connect and between SUAA. but we haven't quite managed to mobilize for targeted votes right at the right moment with the right legislators. And we haven't always been able to collaborate with our fellow universities. I'm not talking about the university presidents who issue dictates from time to time. I'm talking about actual faculty, students, and alumni from all our campuses. And the public universities are the easiest way to mobilize that, even though the private universities are also at risk.
With the president's election, President Trump, I sense that a major cultural shift has occurred, and particularly for diversity matters, multiculturalism. I see that people's lives are now being threatened out in the open in ways that may not have occurred. For example, when Reagan came in. And so my question is, with UIC positioning itself as the most diverse campus and our multiculturalism, and this is all a plus, how do we deal with the hostility that's emerged by some actors, some very extreme right actors who feel very comfortable taking their vengeance now in this period?
Well, of course, we need first to keep the campus safe and to support people here, but beyond that, we need to demonstrate how powerful diversity can be. You know, if you looked at the anti-Trump rally at the Pavilion, you would notice that it was totally multicultural. There were whites, there were Latinos, there were African Americans, there were youth, there were older people. We simply have to do a better job of banding together as a cultural and political force. We certainly have to fight all hate crime and all hate. And, you know, I grew up in Texas when it was segregated and I was part of the civil rights movement, so I've seen this sort of up close and personal. Our first meeting was bombed. We had things thrown at us as we stood in demonstration lines, like beer bottles from passing cars. Fortunately, they didn't shoot in those days, or didn't often. So, you know, it simply is a matter of learning how to build ourselves as a group, both on campus and with other people more broadly. And that's a continuing task that's redone every time something happens. You know, like I say, I think there will be resistance. I don't think the resistance will begin to be effective for some months until more people feel the effects of actually electing Mr. Trump and the Republicans in Congress. But I have every sense that we will have a resistance. The resistance will be effective, and if we do it right, we can win the 2018 and 2020 elections. Yes, go ahead. You had your hand up for a while, but not near the mic.
Yeah. Do you think that a lot of working class men supposedly voted for Trump? So do you think that he's going to really make an impact on the poor people in working class?
You know, I've seen trickle-down economics before, and when you do a budget cut for the rich, it doesn't translate to a lot better salary, you know, the $15 an hour salary or something for the poor. So my sense is that for the broader America, Trump's presidency will be a failure. That's what I think will happen. And we will right the ship and say, no, we want to go another way. So if you want my long-term prediction, I don't see how Trump's policies help the working class. Now, if he's right, and you know, I do think the infrastructure program would be great. I don't know that the private sector is going to fund it, but let's suppose that works. I think $1 trillion infrastructure program is great. It's not going to go to mass transit. It's not going to go to some things we might put first, but the infrastructure rebuilding would be a good thing, and it would help a lot of people get jobs. And because that would tighten the labor market, people's wages would go up to some extent. So Hillary had also planned to have $1 trillion infrastructure, more funded on the government side, plan if she were elected. I think so far that's the one issue both Democrats and Republicans agree is a great idea because it helps their constituents. You know, they see nice new shiny roads or a new bridge or whatever, and they also get jobs and contracts. But for the rest of the Trump plan, a big tax cut for the rich just isn't going to translate to increasing salaries of college professors at UIC, much less the service employees who work here. One last question, and then maybe we should break up and organize. Yes, in the back.
In your study, when you study the different social groups in Chicago, does that include the metropolitan area or just within the city?
That's also true in the metropolitan region.
But
I
did
haven't
you
got the
study-
map for the metropolitan region. But, you know, particularly in poverty, we've been studying that, and, you know, we usually talk about the ghettos like the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago and so forth. Anybody who's been out to Harvey and Markham, the ghetto just goes on. There are many suburbs that are ghetto suburbs. They're not all nice, bright, and shiny like the Kenilworth or Winnetka or whatever. So yes, the middle class is shrinking in the metropolitan region, but I have not seen maps yet done. Maybe CUPA has done some, or great cities have done some maps. Thank you very much for coming.
Well, thank you very much, and just to remind you, Dick's new book is, there are copies at the back, Winning Elections in the 21st Century, by Dick Simpson and Betty O'Shaughnessy. So if you need to know how to do it and you're interested in changing things, maybe a start with the book and organizing. Thank you.
I'm gonna order a big can of spinach lasagna from the local dentist. Yeah, I know. You know, that's why. And
It'll be on YouTube.
I just put together.